Is your JD Edwards environment still relying on 32-bit components? And if Oracle is moving 32-bit JDE to sustain support, what does that actually mean for your updates, your compliance, and your long-term roadmap? Today, Frank Jordan from ERP Suites joins us to explain the difference between 32-bit and 64-bit JDE and what risks customers need to watch and even what options they have. By the end, you'll know exactly what questions to ask before this becomes a year-end update, payroll, or support emergency. Welcome back to Not Your Grandpa's JD Edwards. I'm your host, Nate Bushfield, and today we're talking about 32-bit JD Edwards moving to sustaining support, what that means, why it matters, and why customers should do it before it turns into a bigger support, compliance, or even an update issue. But joining me today is Frank Jordan from ERP Suites to break down in plain English and help JDE customers think through the move to 64-bit. Frank, how are you doing today? Reoccurring guest
You know,
now.
yeah,
Yeah.
not too bad.
But for the people out there that maybe haven't seen you on the show before, could you give us a little bit of background?
Sure. I'm a director at ERP Suites. I've been working with the One World slash Enterprise One product since 1996. So kind of when it was first starting out. So I guess I am one of your grandpas of JDE, so to speak. The Before that, though, I was another business partner also during the years worked with JD Edwards and Oracle, like from 2000 to 2012 as a consultant at CNC. But even go back to my old days roots of mainframes and AS400s and PCs. Well, I won't age myself too much, but it was back in the days. So,
Yeah, I remember the last time you were on, we got into a conversation about floppy disks, which is something that I've only seen. I've utilized a few times when I was young, but haven't really couldn't say that I've actually utilized them to the full extent. I mean, my growing up was USB drives. That was like the main thing that we utilized in my youth. So a little bit of difference here, but because you've been around JD Edwards for so long, you have really seen everything change. And speaking of changes, when customers are hearing about the 32-bit versus 64-bit, what is actually changing for them?
well, the big thing is you look at the history of the applications and the tools did start out as 32-bit. Operating systems, as far as like Linux and Windows and all that, they've been 64-bit with 32 and even 16-bit compatibility for applications since like the 90s and 2000s. But the big change for JDI was started back in 9.2.3, which was back in 2019, 2020. So they knew that 32-bit, a lot of components are 64-bit and more infrastructure was becoming 64-bit only. So the applications have to change in order to communicate, work with it, and so forth. Along with the main thing that the 64-bit does is it provides a larger memory space, make it easier to work with larger and larger amounts of data. Most computing doesn't usually go down in resource usage. It usually has more feature, more functionality, and so forth. So, again, starting with the tools 923X, they, being JD Edwards, started a migration path for customers to go to 64-bit applications and tools. And then the big thing, we'll talk a little bit more, but then starting with release 22, which was 926, that one became a 64-bit only tools. So once you go to that, we basically your applications are running in 64-bit mode.
Yeah. So, what would you say the biggest parts of JD Edwards are usually the most affected by a 64-bit migration?
Well, under the covers, the Java, the website, that's been running 64-bit Java for again many, many years. Most people don't even may not even realize it except for the technology folks. The places where the 32-bit or 64-bit binaries run, and that's the C code, the compiled code, that is going to be like under enterprise servers deployment, the what we call the development or fact clients. And so the processes that are used to do this compiles like the package build, the the objects themselves, the path code of those C objects, those are the ones that you know, that's where that gets housed. So really they are executables or binary, what we call, again, if you're on Windows, it's called a DLL. On the library or in Linux, the nomenclature is like a shared library. So it's just the code that actually runs. That's where you what they call master business functions in JD Edwards speak. That's where they get the most performance because it's closer to our hardware. Now, the big thing about that though is um JD Edwards for their code. So things are taking software update, application software update or a electronic software update. They're taking care of that code. They know what their code does. But where you have to also consider is if you hire a developer, you had your own in-house developers doing custom C business functions, you have to account and review it just to make sure that it will work in a 64-bit.
So, what would you say like customers often misunderstand about maybe staying on 32-bit?
Yeah, so where we're at right now is a number of customers. So JD Edwards published the last quote 32 and 64-bit set of tools was some will call it release 21 back in 2021, but it was tools 9256. So that was the last tools released where you could get 32-bit tools or a 64-bit tools. Like I said, after that, in release 22, everything became 64-bit. So you'd have to migrate your JDAWS application up to the 64-bit. And that just became part of those updates or upgrades, however you like to look at it. The uh, the thing with people parking on it now, again, that's 5 years now running. And so we're getting to the point as these systems age, they're not quite like fine wines in that, it does tend to get a little more difficult to be able to patch it. So, yeah, because that tools releases on, and we'll talk a little bit about it, but sustaining support, they're not getting new patches. It still runs on that older hardware, but again, the older hardware, as time goes on, it becomes a little harder to support. There can be regulations or legalities where if that operating system goes out of support by that vendor and your options become narrower, you won't be able to get updates because the infrastructure vendors, the database, the operating system of Linux, Windows, AS4 Home, etc. The vendors themselves have certain timelines that they only support now. There's usually a lifetime, let's say general, like maybe 5 years, and you might get some extended support where you either pay additional fees or whatever. But the bottom line is that everything keeps changing. The world we live in today with security patches, unfortunately, we live in the age where things change a lot faster than they used to. There's a lot more automation to change that. So, uh, the technologies themselves continue to change certain features, functionality. Just new features, functionality may not be completely backward compatible. So, or they definitely may not exist. An example would be if you were on a really old release like Tools 9.1 and or application 909 9.1, you even will even have user-defined objects as a JD Edwards feature functionality. So that's a quick example where you start to get out of date.
Yeah. And I feel like we have this type of conversation on the podcast a lot of just saying that it runs doesn't mean that it's current. It doesn't mean that it's safe. It doesn't mean that it's easy to patch or even low risk. There's so many sides of this that people might look at it and be like, it's not broke. I'm not going to fix it. But it's that conversation of being proactive instead of reactive. Yeah, it might run right now. If you look out in 5 years, though, it who knows what's really going to happen there. And with all these new tools and AI agents and everything that's coming to JD Edwards, to be stuck in the past is just something that a lot of companies can't afford right now. So it's all about moving to current and getting in front of this because, yes, 32 bit is moving to sustaining support. But what does that actually mean for customers that are still on a 32-bit path? Like, what does sustaining support truly mean to them?
Well, Oracle is a vendor. Again, a lot of the other vendors, IBM, Microsoft, et cetera, they have some similar type. It varies, but Oracle's has 3 types of stages or life cycle of the products. So they have the premier support, that's where they guarantee, usually that's a 5-year window, uh, unless you're into what they call continuous delivery, which is what the JD Edwards application is as a whole. The continuous delivery model, they guarantee that out to as far as the product, out to a 10-year window. So right now, this is going out to 2036, 2037 that Oracle has committed the product. It's not going anywhere, but that the enterprise one, Jody Everett's product, they will continue developing it and enhancing it and so forth at a minimum until 2036, 2037. And then usually again at the blueprint event in April or May, the Quest event, they'll announce out on MyOracle support that that's another year. And they've been doing that for, again, it came out, 9.2 came out in 2015. But here we are at 11 plus years. It's different with the continuous delivery where they're not redoing the product. They're just saying, hey, we got a new application release. They just continuously enhance the product there. So the premier support, for a number of Oracle products is that 5-year window. Then they also have what they call an extended support. And usually that's a range of maybe 3 years most of the time. And again, for a fee, you're getting that. And then you have what's called sustaining. So sustaining means Oracle is no longer creating new patches like security updates, new features, functionality, bug fixes, etc. You can still download the existing fixes that came off for it and so forth, but there's no new active development against that. So, and it's similar, like the WebLogic, that's a different technology product group in Oracle, but the database and so forth, they have those and they have some nuances what they call long-term support as well. And in some ways that's a little more akin to the continuous delivery, but that's a longer window for a certain level. So like on WebLogic, long-term support is 12.294 for the 12, 12G 12C, excuse me. But you can go in there and it's a little bit above that 5 year. So they select something where a customer can kind of stay at that a bit. But again, it's still eventually will catch up to you. But you're planning your horizon that way. The systems will still run. The same deal. But what will happen is the world around the business is changing. Browsers get updated. Like you said, artificial intelligent agents, interfaces, the shifts of how integrations work over the years. Sometimes we have flat files versus uh, our business services or XML interoperability, XML documents, and things move into REST type calls, REST APIs with JSON, et cetera. So you've got technology continue to change and evolve. When you're on these older releases like that, it can become a challenge to be able to take advantage of it, or be maybe as technically nimble, or you're developing quite a bit on the old methods, and then the vendor says, "Well, we may not maintain that product." So then we have migrations to consider, and so then what it leads you to is once you get to sustained support, you're not like your tools, you're not making that more current. The quick example is if you were on sustaining support and let's say you're on Windows 2012, that's out of the support window. So if there was a big security issue, a security patch or hacks, you wouldn't be able to really get in any for it. So you'd have to update multiple elements of your infrastructure in order to say, look, go to Windows 2022 or 2025, et cetera.
And that's interesting that you bring up security so much. Would you say that that is the biggest compliance risk if they wait too long to switch, or are there maybe other either even operational or compliance risks that they should be on the lookout for if they're waiting too long to make this switch?
Yeah, well, security is one of them. In this day and age, AI is accelerating hacks and vulnerabilities and so forth that get discovered. You see it on the news all the time. But yeah, there's a lot of other areas too where some customers can install the code and not really take any additional issues. That gets a little more rare over time, but um, anything that's in like the regulatory, so where laws are changing, you have the HR payroll modules. Well, those laws change every year. I mean, they change tax laws and all that change every month.
Yeah.
So yeah, you have to have software updates for a number of that and do tax calculations and so forth, like sales and use tax or the payroll taxes, those type of things. There's vendors for that. You have to get those updates. And then from a globalization side, if you're a global customer, there are localizations. And there's code specific to an actual country or region. And some of those, they have certain requirements as well. So you may have to take those type of software updates to stay in compliance. Or some might go in and do customization of their own, but the localization, depending on the country or the region, a number of them can change monthly or weekly, depending on what's going on and what you need to do there. So you have to take that kind of stuff, into account in order to, people like to get paid, so to speak, and you want your payroll to be right. So that's where that comes into play there, where you're a lot more, and those of course do have a factor, an influencing factor where the like a payroll year end, when you get your W-2s and all that type of stuff, that all has to be up software updates to make sure all those calculations work correctly and so forth.
Yeah. And it's that kind of rolls right into the next question that I have, which is why are ESU's payroll updates, regulatory changes, and even localization such a big part of this conversation?
Well, again, JD Edwards delivers their code in an electronic software update in the ESU. Then they also consolidate them into larger groups, like we call those a baseline. And then there's application software updates or ASUs. The ASU, traditionally, there's been an update every year for that, and that has, a certain date up to a certain date. So, generally they go up until like around October, November, and that's all the application updates rolled into this, like I'll call like update 26. Then the latest one that's just coming out and announced this month are the critical software set updates. So the CSPU, those are security patches that also can be applied with the tools for security fixes. But what Oracle's doing is just being a little more transparent on the software fixes, packaging them together to make that. So, again, it's ever evolving. It used to be we'd take those, a lot of customers would do their application updates more surgical for certain applications, certain functional groups, and so forth. They take the yearly update. We try to recommend the 12 months. Some go 24 months, but it just depends on the level of effort and testing and things. There are a number of factors that go into that. With these monthly updates, though, from the security standpoint, that may change that cadence a bit. If you know your applications have to be affected, you may very well want to do that. So you've got those pieces to consider, and that becomes a little more time sensitive. You know, it might be an update that's they call it 0 day, where you know it may proliferate pretty quickly if there was a security risk of that. Again, there's a lot of things you can do to minimize that exposure to your system, not on the internet and so forth. But people will, I think we're seeing a trend where the patching has become, you know, much more aggressive in our pasting. We tend to do quite a bit of that for our customers. And again, like the development side, non-prod first, and put it into production. It's not just applying Windows patches or OS. You know, you've got your WebLogic, your Java, your tools, your applications, your database. The list goes on and on. So, but the other part, like I said, your payroll updates, you have to take those and get they go at various levels. You got your federal level, your state level, some of the local requirements, and so forth. So they're a lot of times they're taking updates at a minimum. They're taking at the end of the year or the year end payroll. But you know, a number of times they're taking it for updates on the taxes. Or a lot of times that's monthly. You'll have the monthly changes that they may or may not want, depending on what's going on. Again, regulatory updates may be something that certain customers in certain industries, JD Edwards is publishing those out, and they need to have that either type of reporting or ways of capturing it, so forth. And then, like I said, localizations is another big one. It has a lot of change going on. So the big thing right now, what they were talking about was at Blueprint. What Oracle announced there is that the software updates, so that they an issue comes in one or two formats. The traditional one is packaged with a Windows setup installer, and that executable, the exe that they run. So we put this on a deployment server, but I'll get a little deep down in here. But that executable though is a 32-bit executable. That's one of the things that's going to sustain the support. So what Oracle's saying is when the release 27 tools comes out, they will not be releasing 32-bit ES package ESUs. So what that means is that it'll be a 64-bit executable software package. The other one is a web ESU, which is relatively newer. It's been out for a few years now, but web ESU, it's even lighter because it doesn't have the package installer. It's strictly just the code in an XML format. The the thing about the 64-bit ESU, what that means to a customer is, let's say you were on the 32-bit 95, it was released 94, whatever, one of those, you won't be able to run that 64-bit software update because you have 32-bit Windows deployment server. So you wouldn't be able to type the code. Now, again, your options will be, and that's what we'll discuss a little bit here, is you either go up to a tools level that has, you know, you migrated to the 64-bit deployment server and you're running 64-bit code, or another quick workaround. Again, it will be a workaround for now, but you could, if you're on a appropriate tools, you can make your deployment server 64-bit. So the deployment server could then handle this 64-bit ESU format because they're still delivering the C code will still be delivered 32-bit and 64-bit at this time. It's just the package installer that the software update comes in. That's the part that's going to 64-bit because again, it's getting more and more difficult for Oracle to maintain these really old systems. It wouldn't surprise me that some of the machines that they use to create these 32-bit ESUs, I made I kind of quipped a little bit about Windows 2012, but that might be the machines that they're running. And so, you know, Oracle also internally, JD Edwards is probably being forced. You know, this is my conjecture, but you know, they're being forced also they have compliance issues as well. They're just another company in a lot of respects.
Mm. So if a customer is still on 32-bit or even older tools, what options do they actually have to go from here?
Okay, so that's what I led into a little bit is that you plan a move up to a supported 64-bit tools, and you're updating your application. So a lot of times for most customers that want to do that, again, the 64-bit isn't, it's a little more work to do that 32 to 64-bit than just a straight tools. But usually it's encompassed within it like a technology refresh, a technology upgrade. So if you've been sitting parked at 9256, a lot of your infrastructure is already either out of support or getting close to being out of support at your Windows or your Linux, um, database levels, etc. So we package this up, and a lot of times we'll also recommend go ahead and get the application updates so that hopefully this is not just a technology project. It can be, where you're just doing a like for like, you bring it up, you're just going to 64-bit for compliance and, getting into supported configurations and so forth. You also have the options of, maybe doing some business transformation or just taking advantage of some new features where you have a smaller scope. So you get a little more business value out of it as well. And that would sound a little bit like marketing, but the main thing they had at last year's blueprint, which I thought was actually very timely, but it said, you do these upgrades. Are you still going to run your JD Ever system like it's 2005? We talked about that. Or do you want to go in and take advantage of some of the new features, functionality, and tools, run it like it's 2025?
Oh, yeah.
So some still choose to do just the basic like for like. But if you can, at least have a phase or a subsequent phase where you start implementing some of the newer pieces there. But like you said, another quick stopgap measure for some customers, if they're on the first rules release, getting again in these tech details that supported the deployment server at 64-bit was Tools 924. So 923 was the first of app support, but the deployment server really wasn't there at that point. So in Tools 924, you could do that. So as a quick workaround, you could update just your deployment server to 64-bit and still continue to take the ESUs when they make that change in Q4 of this year, 2026. Again, in the background, JD Edwards still has the 32-bit code and artifacts. So they store both 32-bit and the 64-bit. You'll run 64-bit, but you could still have your OMW, what they call the OMW objects of record could still be 32-bit C code. So, or
Mhm.
what it's doing is it has a conversion there of the 64-bit as well, and you're literally running 64-bit, but your source code could still be 32-bit, which will have both of it. Again, I got a little into the weeds there, but so this would allow you at least to do that. Again, the writing's on the wall, and the bottom line is that more and more of the 32-bit, the 64-bit ESU install will also go by the wayside, down the road, and it'll be mainly web only. So, that's just the general directions that Orca talks about. But if push came to shove, if I want to wait till Q4, but again, if you really couldn't do a tools refresh and upgrade, you could consider the plug server if you're at a white tools level to do that. Or you could also, if you were say like tools 922 or something of that nature, you could potentially, update it to 9256, 32 or 32-bit, but still have to take the deployment server to 64-bit.
Yeah.
Again, these are some conversations though. If we do that, those are kind of combos that aren't commonly done. So,
And those are
I'm over
the
to it. Yeah.
Yeah. And those are those temporary workarounds
Yeah, the
to a degree.
temporary, I'm talking maybe 12 to 24 months. Why
Yeah.
sometimes.
Exactly. So what is the true difference there between one of those temporary workarounds and then just doing a true 64-bit migration? Like it seems like one will buy you time and one will set you up for the future. Am I
Exactly.
right?
Yep. Yep. So let's use the customer that parks himself at 9256. So they're at 32-bit there. We actually had some that went to 925X and they went 64-bit. So at least their transition up to a later tools was easier. Um, but again, it's not, this has been around for well over 5 years now. So the process of doing the 64-bit migration is pretty well known. Said it adds a little bit of time, but from a compatibility and so forth, it's just easier to do that. There is the app side of this as well, though. So we have some customers that updated their tools to 9256, but they didn't update their application. So they might be sitting back at update two of application was lined up too. Well, they didn't do the code, the application code with the 64-bit changes until update three, update four. And there's subsequent ones that came along a little bit later there with bug fixes and so forth, enhanced new functionality, et cetera, et cetera. So, it almost behooves you just to say, I'm going to do the app update and I will do the tools. And so you get a better bang for the buck. You're going to be testing anyways because the 64-bit migration. A lot of times with tools, you may not have to test quite as much, but with the 64-bit migration, because you are having hundreds of objects, of C objects that get updated, you pretty well have got to do more extensive application testing. So you might as well just take that opportunity and get yourself current. So your position, your system, like I said, to take advantage of new features, functionality that's available to you there. Um, you know, on top of that, as far as the temporary deployment server, like I said, if I have my first choice, my first recommendation, I'm not going to recommend that. Again, that's something more of a last resort. It's definitely not a long term, but again, if you're at the end, you're right at the point where it's year end and you really need something there. This is a way to maybe get you, across the year end, but you're still going to have to, you're going to get pushed into that. So the big thing about this is if you're in these situations and you really haven't worked with a partner, talked to Oracle, or gone through like Learn JDE, you do need to try to develop some kind of roadmap. uh,
Yeah.
Go back and have a strategy what you would like to do. Like I said, you basically have a create what we call application technical debt. And you've gotten to the point where you haven't taken the updates. You pay to work all the support dollars all these years, and they'll get the value of what you've been paying for. To me, it's like saying, well, I love Word 2000. Yeah, okay, Word 2000 looks really nice, but it's 25 years old. That actually was 16-bit back then. And then it's 32-bit, and they also have the 64-bit version. So, but again, we will start running into compatibility issues. We may not have had the formats, some of the things I've saved in the file, PDF, and so forth. So there's feature functionality, in that example where the newer versions will help you with newer releases, but you're not going to get any support. So,
Mhm. So you're saying that I should be on the lookout for 128-bit coming soon.
yeah, funny you say that. So AS400 actually, yeah, from IBM, when they released that in the 90s, it is one of the few 128-bit operating systems. So IBM was already looking way out there. So that memory address, and they ran into that stuff in the 70s and the 80s, I believe in the 60s. But the memory footprints, again, the 32-bit, the largest application memory space, 32-bit can address is 4 gig. Application wise, it can be generally about, depending on the operating system, about 2 gig. So that becomes a limitation again with the amount of data and some of the things. We have a number of applications like in JD Edwards, the MRP. If you're doing a full regen and you're going across all your items and so forth, for it to come up with that, that can hit that 2 gig limit. So again, there's ways around that. Some people will split it all out, give versions to keep it lower. Invoicing's another area, pricing. So there's a number of areas that where the application needs we're outgrowing 32-bit. It's not a huge number, but by having that 64-bit, it does help you a bit with the performance as well because you've got a larger memory space to operate within. So you do see, with the Windows and Linux platforms, as far as 64-bit itself, part of espousing the benefit there, but you are, yes, you're using more bits, but you actually do gain some efficiencies because it's not, the operating system is not running in 32-bit mode to accommodate it. The only one where you don't see a large net change difference is the AS400 because it's 128. So it literally,
Yeah.
it is, it's doing, whether it's 32 or 64-bit, it's still translating some of the address space in order to slice it down. In this case, it's slicing it down to a lower bit size.
Mhm. Yeah. So when does this all go from a simple 64-bit migration to maybe a broader technology refresh?
Well, again, you're going to have business drivers, you have compliance drivers. The as far as the planning of it, you want to go in and you kind of look at, you know, what do we have today? Take your inventory. Are you even in the position to consider some of the 64-bit on the existing tools release? You might not be able to. Again, you might be on these older ones. What are your application levels? You also have to look at the infrastructure, all the pieces surrounding it, the database, the operating systems, et cetera, your third parties, whatever you're working with. So you have third party applications that work with JD Edwards. You have to kind of take those all into account. So you look at that. If there's also an analysis, again, all the partners can help you with this. We do this quite a bit, but you look at customizations. So you may have to have some retrofit. Again, where I talk about not doing a like for like, but sometimes on the retrofits, again, if you're a little, you're 5+ years back or more, there could very well be some opportunities where you can rationalize some of the customizations and transform them over into user-defined objects. So, a quickie is if you had a bunch of vocabulary overrides, which is actually a change in what the columns look like in the applications, you're changing a spec file specification. Now those can be done in all the grid formats, basically, or you can change that column there. And when you upgrade with a software update or whatever, it doesn't get replaced. Where the vocab override today, where if it's spec based, it's something you have to check in on. Those have to be reapplied manually for developers reapplying their vocab override or a power user setting. So just those type of things can save you value. Again, reduces the retrofit times and so forth. But what you get out of that is JD Edwards has put a lot of time and effort in the retrofit tools into the what they call, on the glass, the user defined objects to remove the friction of doing these updates. So again, that's what they're trying to make it is fairly easy that you can take these updates either for specific applications on a certain cadence, quarterly, semi-annual, annual, whatever you like to do. And the impact on the business is much less. And the more frequent you do it, the smaller that amount of change that you're doing. When you do 5 years,
Mhm.
that's, there literally can be thousands of objects perhaps. So it takes a little more. effort there. But even today, a lot of these upgrades, these tools update refreshes that we do with the infrastructure, these things are in it, sometimes the actual upgrades, and I'm talking now, I'm showing my grandpa JD, the upgrades to a new release, like if you went from 9.1 to 9.2, it could be anywhere from, 9 months to 18 months. Now, within 9.2 and doing the tools and the apps and so forth, most of the time you're measuring those things, it's pretty rare for it to be a year. Most of these things are, months. Some cases, if they're doing these on a very frequent cadence, like yearly, and these things are getting measured sometimes in weeks. So again, once you've gone through it and you've got most of where your changes are, and you take advantage of some of JD Edwards tools that helps track your customizations. And like I said, you move some of them over to user-defined objects. It just gets easier and easier to update. So, but yeah, it's a journey. Not everybody's in the same place, and not everything looks the same way. But it definitely is noticeably better.
Yeah. So, and we talked about the workarounds earlier, but how should a customer decide whether to go the workaround route or use this as a modernization opportunity?
Bottom line is it depends on the apps. Like I said, if you're on payroll and you are at the older level, and maybe you don't have the time, to the 64-bit deployment server might have to be the answer. Or again, this might be another driver and to do the technology refresh. It that'll depend on the business timings and requirements and so forth. So that each situation is going to be need to be evaluated and judged there. The but to me that this is going to, it's not like this is a surprise from Oracle. They've been talking about it, that the 32-bit, when they did again 5 years ago with 925, who said that was, and then now it's going to be 64-bit. So they've given us 5 years to get that piece going. So now they're having to, the pressures on them on other areas. It doesn't continue forever. That increases cost and maintenance and so forth. So that's the reason why they're doing what they're doing.
Yeah. So, before a customer starts a 64-bit JD upgrade or even a technology refresh, what would you say the most important questions are that they should be asking?
Yeah. So reinforcing, you know, where are you at today? What are you doing today? What E1 tools release are we on? So what are our options, or what where we would look come in from a consulting standpoint? Again, it's a little different migration path if you're on tools 922 versus if you're up on 9256, 32-bit. Yeah. So, and that plays into also, what application update level are you on? Again, normally what we're trying to do is kind of nudge toward doing the app and the tools together, because the 64-bit migration very well has a number of like you said, the C objects that have to be updated. This is the opportune time to do that. But in addition to that, again, how long in the tooth is the infrastructure, the database, the Windows or Linux operating systems, the 400 operating system, or maybe someone's still sitting on V7R3 OS, where V7R5 right now is the supported level, and the V7R4, just as an example, that one's going out of the premier support as well this year. So, you have some of that. There needs to be, again, some categorization. You look at, what are our customizations? What do we have there? Do we have any timelines or deadlines that we need to get all this done and prepared for the business? Um, what features and functionality is our day to day that we have to make sure those all work. And they're like being able to ship product out the door, being able to run a payroll, being able to, receive, you do your accounts receivable and have your checks go out so you can pay the vendors. They all tend to like that and you can do that. So, you have all those kind of factors in, and, a lot of times, depending on this, like you said, looking at the critical business areas, you're then defining who's going to be involved in that. So, which areas of expertise, whether that may be um, consultants or power users or knowledge people within the business, where do you get those resources from? And what's that vision of, okay, what type of upgrade or update were we doing here? Were we just doing the like for like? Again, maybe we're keeping our JD Edwards looking like it was running from 2005, or do we want to, get some again that additional benefit of taking advantage at least of maybe a few quick strategic wins, something that would benefit the business, or orchestrations that I've talked about user-defined objects, but we still have customers that haven't really done much with orchestrations. So it's a much smaller number now that it's 10-year-old technology, but there's still a few that haven't done any robotic process automations or RPA and so forth.
Mhm. Yeah. So another questions, I guess. What should customers ask a partner before trusting them with this type of product or project?
Well, I'll speak to at least what I know customers ask us.
Mhm. Mhm.
Um, so a lot of times, have we done them? So ERP suites are project consultant side. We've done literally. uh, Well, I've worked with almost over 400 customers now in my career, different customers. But as far as these migrations, I mean, we've had multiple go lives here this month. We have several every month. So this is right in our wheelhouse from the technology side, the application side, and development as well. I mean, we have the application consulting resources that can help with the retrofits, help supplant with if you're lacking in certain resources or you want to learn new feature functionality. We have all of that. Uh, as far as like looking at what you already have and helping develop, like I said, helping develop that recommendation of how do I get from point A to point B. We help with that quite a bit. Um, we do have the ability for having do business functions. If a customer does have custom, maybe those people that did that or they contracted that out, they're no longer around. We do have C developers or E1 developers that know how to do C business functions. I have to admit that's actually not a very common skill. So it's not like there's thousands of them out there. So a number of times we'll have that. Basically, again, we tend to go through, if someone's asking, can you help me come up and get into this continuous delivery model? I don't want to get stuck the same way where I don't update my system for 5+ years. How can I, change that? Yeah, so that makes a big difference. Like so, it's a spectrum. Not everybody's going to be taking quarterly updates on everything and so forth. But you definitely don't want this to again keep building the debt up where you're years and years behind. Um, and we'll explain differences. Like I said, there's migrations, tech refreshes. These are the three, kind of the three updates, and what we call either transformation or modernization. Yeah, so the modernization is, hey, I've been running my system like I did back in 2005. How do we modernize that? How do we take advantage of strategically putting in user-defined objects for orchestrations, personal forms, form extensions, et cetera, et cetera. And, you know, from our project management side, we had dedicated project managers that work on these full time as well. So we help. we help the customer with their project managers. We assist with that as far as coming up with testing scripts, how we handle certain situations and so forth. And you have to have the business involved, because the people that are running it every day, they know the data, they know the processes that are in place. Again, our application functional teams do a really nice job of interviewing and understanding the business, and then that also can lead into like I said, these modernization where there may be some new best practices or some tweaks to help the process, or maybe something's manual, and there's ways in JD Edwards to help streamline that. Uh, So that it comes onto that part, and then I guess the biggest thing, at least that we look at from a JD Edwards and ERP Suites as a company, is we view it as a partnership. It's not
Yeah.
just ask us, and we want to help the customer be successful so that we're successful. And it definitely it goes both ways. It's just helping each other to reach the same goal and do it effectively.
Mhm. And it's a perfect checklist of yes, ERP Suites does all of these things, but there are others that are out there that do them as well. But if you're on a team and they're still on 32-bit JD Edwards path, or you're not sure how this change affects your updates, your payroll, your compliance, or your long-term roadmap, ERP Suites is here to help. Visit erpsuites.com today to connect with our team and start with a practical assessment of where your environment stands today. But that's a wrap on today's episode of Not Your Grandpa's JD Edwards. The big takeaway, 32-bit is moving to sustaining support. It does not mean, though, that JDE is going away, but it does mean customers need to understand their risk, their update path, and options before they are forced into a rush decision. Frank, thank you again for joining and making this topic easier to understand. We always enjoy when you come onto the pod. Now you're a reoccurring guest, so you have to come on whenever I say. That's what they tell me. I don't make the rules. But if this episode was helpful, subscribe, leave a like, and share it with someone on your IT, your finance, your payroll, or compliance team. But until next time, keep modernizing. And remember, this is not your grandpa's JD Edwards.